a dusty store in Mill Creek. Two brothers, a loyal German shepherd and a secret buried for generations. What they thought was a useless inheritance becomes a battlefield for memory and truth. Their grandfather, Samuel Carter, once gave shelter to those who had nowhere else to turn. Now, powerful men like Richard Hale seek to erase that legacy forever. Ethan stands firm. Jake wants escape. Between treasure and betrayal, which path will they choose? Find out in this unfolding saga. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. The rain had come in a slow, honest way, a Midwestern drizzle that settled into the seams of a small Illinois town and made everything smell like wet wood and old coins. Ethan Carter parked his battered Ford by the curb and listened to the wipers tick to a final rest. Beside him, Ranger sat, straight alert eyes on the boarded windows of Carter's General, the store that bore his last name and none of his memories. Jake stood under the overhang with a ring of keys and a paper envelope he kept rotating in his fingers like he could rub clean the news inside. "They made it official," Jake said when Ethan stepped out. "Title's ours. Taxes are backdated. Utilities are off, roof leaks everywhere. Mrs. Henderson says we should take whatever offer we can get." Ethan looked at the widow front, the faded lettering that time had worn to a ghost Carter's. He remembered their grandfather's hands more than his face, the way those hands could fold a dollar bill flat as a blade. The man had gone quiet in his last years, and the quiet had a way of living on in the rooms he left behind. "Unlock it," Ethan said, voice calm as a training field. Ranger hopped down and circled nose low, ears working. Inside, the air held dust and mouse musk, the faint sweetness of spilled licorice that had hardened to gems in a corner jar. The floorboards talked under their boots. Shelves leaned at tired angles. Glass cases filmed opaque. A few old seed packets slept in a drawer. Colors washed to soft memories. Corn beans, marigolds. On the far wall, someone had thumbtacked a newspaper from the summer of '79, price of milk circled in red. Jake whistled low. "We could gut it and make it a coffee place," he said, already rearranging the bones of the room with hopeful hands. "Or we sell it and walk." Ethan tested the counters, pressed his palm to a hairline crack that ran like a map through the wood. The Marine in him had a way of measuring space's entries' lines of sight cover without announcing itself. He moved through rooms the way a careful man crosses a dark yard. No rush, no bravado, just the old discipline that kept breath steady and eyes open. "Before we decide," Ethan said, "we see what we've got." They made the long walk of first inventory, the office with its green metal filing cabinet and a rotary phone that looked like a relic dug from a shipwreck, the back room with a slumped pegboard of rusted nails, a narrow stair to the loft where pigeons had once held a union meeting and lost feathers trapped behind slats. Ranger traced their path, checking door thresholds, pausing to taste the air. Outside, a pickup rolled past, slow enough to make opinion visible. Folks in Mill Creek had their opinions at the ready, and most of them had already been delivered to Jake in the language of concern. "You boys don't need an anchor when you're already learning to swim." At the counter, Jake spread the envelope. "Granddad's will is, well, what little there is. We get the building and contents. No cash." He tried a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Happy inheritance. Ethan considered the word. In his world, inheritance was a fingerprint of duty more than dollars. He ran a finger along the counter's edge, dry, splintered, then set his shoulder to a stubborn door and back. The latch finally gave and revealed a narrow utility space lined with old crates. One read, "Carter Feed, St. Clair Copeau." The cheap window there was clouded with spider silk, the kind that glistened like threads of rain. Ranger moved ahead and stopped. His ears tipped forward, nose pointed to the floor near the far corner. The dog scratched once, then glanced up at Ethan as if to say, "There." Ethan crouched and rapped his knuckles on the plank. The sound came back dull, then suddenly hollow, a small change a civilian might miss. He rapped again in a measured pattern, tracing an outline in sound. Hear that Jake asked hope and worry fighting inside the same breath. I hear a cavity, Ethan said, and felt that old, controlled brightening that comes when a pattern starts to show itself. He pressed his palm to the plank and tested the give. Ranger shifted weight and sniffed the seam, then sat back, a sign he'd been trained to use when scent and vibration matched a threshold. The dog wasn't magic. He was a disciplined worker who trusted the cues that nature and training taught him to read. "Let's not start pulling boards yet," Ethan said. "We don't know what we'll stress." Jake's laugh was brittle. "What do you think is down there? A bag of pennies and a raccoon?" He pushed fingers through his hair and looked around at the sagging joists. "Ethan, we can't afford a pipe dream. We need rent money, not a treasure map." Ethan's gaze moved along the wall, old conduit, tacked in careful runs, the kind of care a man takes when he believes a place deserves more than it gets. "Granddad wasn't careless," he said. "Even when the world forgot this place, he kept it closed, not abandoned." He tapped the plank again. The hollow note answered like a small bell. "There's a reason this corner rings." They walked the length of the utility room, testing other boards. Solid hollow. The hollow stayed in a tight shape like a hatch cut with purpose and put back by steady hands. "I'll get the light," Ethan said, and fetched a compact LED from his bag, the same clean beam he favored in dim hallways in other countries. He stooped and traced the seam with cautious patience. Tiny pry marks showed at 2 points old but deliberate. Ranger lay sphinx-like, watching Ethan head, tilted eyes bright with that quiet canine curiosity that reads human attention like a weather vane. "If we're going to open it," Jake said softer now, "we should know what we're opening it for." He set the envelope aside and found a flat bar in a crate. "Let me." Ethan didn't take the tool yet. He set the light on the floor so the beam grazed low across the wood. Imperfections rose in relief. "We'll chart it first," he said. "Slow equals safe." He chalked a rectangle and marked the pry points, then worked the bar in with a cloth to keep the wood from splitting. The board lifted a fraction, exhaling dust, beneath darkness with a stone smell cool and undecorated. He let the board down again. "Not today," Ethan said. "We need proper shoring masks, a plan." Jake exhaled a long, shaky breath. "So there is something." "There's space," Ethan answered, neither promising nor dismissing. He had seen too many hopeful men fall into holes made by their own wishes. But there was a line he felt in his bones now, the line between a dead building and a kept one, and this store, for all its quiet, felt kept. They locked up for lunch at Daisy's Diner 2 doors down, where the specials were written with a careful hand, and the coffee came honest and hot. Mrs. Henderson caught them before they could sit. "Boys," she said, with the gentle firmness of someone who has watched you grow and outgrow your mistakes, "I say this with love. Don't let sentiment drown you. There's a buyer interested. He pays fair. Roof alone will take your savings and then some." Jake nodded like a student hearing the answer he expected on a test he hadn't studied for. Ethan thanked her, listened without bristling. Advice has its own weather. It passes through you if you let it. He cut his sandwich in methodical halves and watched Jake stare at the classifieds on the placemat like they were a life raft. "We'll hear him out," Ethan said at last. "But we don't sign a thing in a storm." When they returned, the rain had slackened to a finer mist, the kind that wove itself into your jacket without you noticing. Ethan checked the back door for signs of tampering. Old habit eyes tracing scratches, paint chips, the language of intruders. Nothing fresh. Inside the utility room waited in its measured silence. Ranger went straight to the chalked rectangle and lay beside it, chin on paws, as if guarding a sleeping friend. Jake looked at the dog and smiled despite himself. "You think he knows?" "He knows we care about this spot," Ethan said. "That's enough for him." They took inventory until dusk turned the windows into mirrors that returned their faces with a few added years. Old ledgers, a mechanical adding machine that still punched out tiny, stubborn totals, a shoebox of invoices with names they didn't recognize, and one they did Thompson Hardware paid in full in a hand like their grandfather's upright careful. Between receipts, Ethan found a small, crease-worn card from a feed supplier with a stamped compass, rose in the corner, just decoration likely. But his thumb stayed on it, a beat too long, measuring the odd tug of attention such symbols can carry. He slid it back where it belonged. Night brought a cooler air that nosed under the doors. They set a bucket under the worst leak and watched the drip establish its steady rhythm. Jake leaned against the counter and rubbed a knuckle along a groove there the way a boy might trace his name carved into a tree. "I keep thinking about Mom," he said. "How she would have loved the sign. Not the bills, but the sign." Ethan nodded. Some pains don't ask to be named. They show up and sit with you like old neighbors. He locked the front, checked the back again, and did what he had done in plenty of far-off places. He walked the perimeter with care, then returned to the center and listened. Somewhere under them, the building held a breath. Ranger's ears flicked once toward the chalk lines and then settled. "Tomorrow," Ethan said. "We come back with what we need. No heroics." Jake smiled a little. "Since when did you become the cautious one?" "Since I learned what broken floors do to ankles," Ethan said, allowing the smallest warmth into his voice. Outside, the streetlights hummed their private hymn. They stood together a moment longer, men who had inherited not wealth, but a question. Ethan locked the door and pocketed the keys. Ranger looked up into his face, waiting for the quiet command that would take them home. "Heel," Ethan said, and the three of them stepped into the wet evening, a family framed by a town that had already decided their story and would soon have to revise it. The next morning carried the crisp edge of early October, the kind of air that sharpened every sound and left the town's streets smelling faintly of leaves and old smoke. Ethan parked the truck again in front of the store, Jake carrying a toolbox that clanked with borrowed crowbars, flashlights, and masks, while Ranger leapt from the truck bed with his usual readiness. The store felt no less worn when they opened the door, but the knowledge of the hollow plank gave the space a strange anticipation, like a stage before a curtain rises. Ethan set the lights in position, not rushing, just doing things in the careful order that habit demanded. Jake looked anxious, but also excited, his fingers restless on the crowbar. "We open it today," he said, no trace of doubt in his voice now. Ethan nodded once, then knelt where the chalk rectangle from the night before still marked the boards. He eased the bar into the seam and lifted with steady pressure. This time the plank gave way without protest, sliding up to reveal not dirt or broken joists, but the top of a stone stairwell cut with precision. The air that rose smelled cool, dry, and strangely preserved, not the damp earth scent of a crawlspace. Ethan leaned down, lantern in hand, and the beam showed steps descending at a steep angle, each stone fitted with the patience of a mason who expected permanence. Jake crouched beside him, eyes wide. "This isn't just storage," he whispered. Ethan agreed silently, feeling that familiar alertness rise in him, the same focus he had known before clearing unknown structures overseas. He clipped a lantern to his vest, adjusted the straps on his gloves, and began the descent. The stairs held stone edges, worn smooth but not crumbling, the construction steady under his weight. Jake followed cautiously, Ranger pressing close behind with ears alert and nose twitching at the stale air. The stairwell bent slightly to the right, and at its base opened into a chamber larger than either expected, with walls of stone blocks locked in tight seams. The space felt deliberate, crafted, and nothing about it resembled a farmer's root cellar. Ethan scanned the walls with the lantern light, catching faint grooves where tools had once struck. A wooden shelf leaned against one wall, long empty, while the floor carried almost no debris except for the thin dust of decades. Ranger padded forward, nose to the wall, then stopped at a section where mortar lines looked slightly different, narrower, almost too clean. The dog scratched twice, then sat back, his way of marking a point of interest. Ethan came closer and ran his hand along the stone, noting a faint, hollow tone when he tapped. "There's something behind here," he said. Jake, already uneasy in the enclosed space, looked skeptical. Maybe just an old repair. But Ranger didn't move, eyes fixed, ears tipped forward. Ethan trusted that focus. He searched the wall with his gloved fingers until he found a loose corner of mortar, then pulled it away carefully. Behind the stone was a shallow recess, and in it sat a metal box no larger than a lunch pail, sealed with a brass lock darkened by time. He pulled it free and set it on the floor, brushing dust from its surface. The box carried weight that felt disproportionate to its size. Jake crouched beside him, voice lowered. Why would anyone hide this behind a wall? Ethan didn't answer immediately. He inspected the box, noting initials faintly etched near the hinge, SC, the same as their grandfather, Samuel Carter. The lock showed no signs of forced entry, just decades of patience. Ethan lifted it, considered its heft, then slid it into his pack. "We open it upstairs," he said. The chamber deserved more exploration, but he measured the risk and decided against pushing further without better gear. They climbed back up into the dusty store, the sudden daylight pressing on them like surfacing from a deep pool. At the counter, Ethan set the box, its metal cold even after carrying. Jake fumbled with the lock, but Ethan stopped him. "Not with force. We do it right." He took a smaller key set from the toolbox, tried a few until one caught with unexpected ease. The lock yielded with a click, the kind of sound that seemed louder than it should in an empty store. The lid creaked open to reveal contents wrapped in layers of oiled cloth preserved with careful intent. Inside lay folded sheets of paper, thin and translucent like onion skin, and beneath them a leather notebook bound with a cord. Ethan unfolded the first sheet and saw a hand-drawn map sketched in pencil showing the outline of their store, but with additional lines running outward like veins, tunnels, passages, routes that extended beneath Mill Creek's town square. Jake leaned in close, disbelief plain on his face. "This can't be real," he murmured, tracing one of the dotted lines. The map carried dates in the corner, 1864, 1921, 1948. Each revision updated the routes as though someone had tended this network across generations. Ethan's eyes caught a small compass rose drawn in careful strokes at the bottom margin, the same symbol he had seen faintly stamped on the old supplier's card the night before. He turned to the notebook, opening its first page. The handwriting was steady and deliberate, their grandfather's style unmistakable. The entries, however, were coded in phrases that suggested more than simple commerce. Supplies secured passage, granted legacy preserved. Jake exhaled sharply. "What does it mean?" Ethan studied the lines, his training pulling him toward patterns. "It's not ledgers," he said. "It's records. Movements, maybe." Ranger nudged the box again, nose pushing against the bottom lining. Ethan lifted the cloth and discovered a smaller envelope tucked flat, sealed with red wax, cracked at one corner. Inside were slips of paper with strings of numbers and letters, a cipher of some kind, and one short note in plain English: "Trust is our strongest lock. Guard it well." Jake leaned back, overwhelmed. "This is more than we can handle, Ethan. If this gets out..." He didn't finish the thought, but the fear was plain. Ethan folded the map carefully, placed it back in the box, and closed the lid with deliberate patience. His expression carried that marine steadiness, but his eyes had narrowed in concentration. "Whatever this is," he said, "Granddad wanted it hidden, not lost. And Ranger found it because he wanted us to pay attention. That means we're supposed to look deeper." Outside, the rain had ended, leaving the street washed clean. The store's faded sign reflected faintly in a puddle. Inside, the Carter brothers and their watchful dog stood at the counter with a box that had opened not just a wall, but a door into secrets no one in Mill Creek seemed willing to speak. The box sat on the counter like a quiet witness, its worn edges hinting at years of concealment, and its contents whispering of responsibilities the brothers had not anticipated. Ethan opened the leather notebook again, flipping through entries that carried Samuel Carter's familiar handwriting, but spoke in tones that were anything but ordinary. The phrases did not describe inventory or transactions, but rather movements of people coded in short sentences that read like fragments of history waiting for their voices to be restored. Ethan read aloud one entry dated March 1949. Family of 5 received shelter safe travel arranged through Northern Route Gratitude Expressed Trust maintained. Jake rubbed his forehead, his disbelief giving way to unease. So Granddad wasn't just running a store, he was hiding people. Ethan nodded slightly, scanning more pages that repeated the same pattern across decades, each entry carefully noted with dates, initials, and phrases like safe passage, confirmed, and special assistance provided. Ranger lay at Ethan's feet, his calm presence grounding the moment as though he too understood the gravity of what had been found. Tucked between the notebook pages were several photographs, black and white, their edges curling, but their images clear enough to reveal faces. Families stood together in small groups, children in coats too large for them, men with tired eyes but grateful smiles, women holding babies tightly. On the back of each photo, Samuel had written notes in the same hand. The Kowalski family safe to Detroit. December 1952. Or Anya and Pavel reunited with relatives in Chicago. April 1961. Each note was short but weighty, a record of lives changed by quiet acts of courage. Jake handled one of the photographs carefully as if afraid it might dissolve in his hands. "Why didn't he ever tell us?" he asked, voice soft. Ethan kept turning the pages, each one layering evidence upon evidence until the narrative could not be denied. Their grandfather had been part of a network that chose action over silence, offering refuge when official channels closed their doors. The letters at the bottom of the box added even more weight to the revelation. Dozens of envelopes addressed to Samuel Carter were bundled neatly with twine postmarked from cities across the Midwest. Inside each letter carried gratitude in words that were simple but profound. One letter, written in careful English from a Hungarian immigrant in 1957, read, "Your kindness gave us a chance to start again. We will never forget the night your home gave us safety." Another from 1964, penned in neat cursive, expressed thanks for sheltering 2 brothers escaping unrest in the South. The writer signing only with initials as if secrecy still mattered even years later. Ethan felt the steady rhythm of his breathing change the Marine in him, recognizing the difference between duty done in daylight and duty carried in silence for decades. His grandfather had lived that silence, bearing the weight of a mission no one outside the network would ever acknowledge. Jake paced behind him, struggling between pride and fear. If this comes out, people might not see it as noble. They might twist it, call it something else. Ethan looked at him with steady eyes. The truth doesn't vanish because people misname it. These people were real. Their gratitude was real. That matters. Ranger rose and padded to a corner near the filing cabinet, pawing lightly at the lower drawer. Ethan opened it and found another envelope larger and heavier, filled with more photographs and additional records. Some showed their grandfather standing beside travelers whose faces were hidden or turned away from the camera for safety. Others displayed receipts for supplies bought in cash, coded in ledgers that outwardly seemed ordinary, but secretly supported a humanitarian effort disguised as commerce. Ethan laid the materials across the counter, creating a mosaic of Samuel Carter's life, hidden behind the simple identity of a storekeeper. The realization settled on both brothers. The Carter store had not been failing all those years, but had been serving a higher purpose that could not be measured in sales or profits. Jake sat heavily on the stool, hands covering his mouth, eyes searching the floor as though the boards themselves might offer answers. All those nights we thought Granddad was just a stubborn old man clinging to a dying store. He murmured he was carrying something bigger than we could see. Ethan closed the notebook carefully, his hands lingering on the worn leather cover, a gesture of respect for the man who had lived with secrets in order to protect others. "He trusted us with this," Ethan said firmly. "He left it for us to find. He wanted us to know." Jake met his brother's gaze, torn between the weight of inheritance and the lure of escape. "But what do we do with it now? If we tell the wrong people, this history could vanish under doubt or be destroyed by those who don't want it remembered." Ethan glanced toward the boarded windows where daylight filtered in weakly illuminating dust motes that swirled like restless memories. He understood the caution, but also felt the pull of responsibility. The Marine in him knew the value of strategy, patience, and choosing the right time to reveal a position. Yet he also felt the weight of silence that had already lasted too long. Ranger gave a quiet whine and looked toward the back room ears, angled sharply as though reminding them the discovery was not complete. There were still unanswered questions hidden beneath the floor and inside the walls. Ethan placed the notebook back in the box and locked it again, not to bury the truth, but to protect it until they were ready to face what lay ahead. He picked up one of the letters, folded it carefully, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "This is our compass now," he said softly. Jake exhaled and nodded reluctantly, realizing that the choice had already been made. The day after Ethan and Jake uncovered the coded notes and photographs, Mill Creek woke to a gray sky that carried the heaviness of unfinished storms. The brothers arrived early at the store, intent on reviewing the letters again when they found a black sedan parked across the street, its polished surface out of place against the modest storefronts of town. A man stepped out with the practiced ease of someone used to control his suit, sharp, his smile calculated. "Good morning, gentlemen," he greeted as though they were already acquainted. "Richard Hale. I represent Hale Development." He shook Jake's hand warmly, then extended the same to Ethan, who accepted with a reserved nod. Hale spoke with charm that carried weight, his voice designed to soothe hesitation. "I heard Carter's General has found its way into your hands. My firm has been working on revitalization projects in towns like this, and your building caught our attention. I'd like to make you an offer." Jake glanced at Ethan, his eyes flickering with the kind of surprise that leaned toward relief. "You want to buy this place?" he asked. Hale smiled. "Not just buy. I'm prepared to offer you well above its current appraised value. Consider it a recognition of its central location, historical charm, and potential." He produced a leather portfolio, laying out crisp papers across the counter where just yesterday Ethan had spread out their grandfather's secret notes. Jake leaned forward immediately, scanning numbers that made his shoulders relax. "This is more than fair," Jake murmured, excitement rising. "This is more than generous." Ethan did not move toward the papers, his gaze steady on Hale. "Why this building?" he asked. Hale's smile did not falter. "We see opportunity where others see decay. Carter's General sits on land perfect for modern mixed-use development. We want to breathe new life into Mill Creek." Ranger, lying near Ethan's boots, gave a low, soft growl, the kind that came when the dog sensed something beneath polished surfaces. Ethan crouched, resting a hand on Ranger's head before finally stepping closer to examine the contract. He read each page with the same discipline he once used when scanning mission briefs, his eyes trained to catch the words most people overlook. On page 3, in small print beneath financial details, he found the line, "All documents, materials, artifacts, and property discovered within the premises to be transferred unconditionally to Hale Development." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. He read the line again, confirming its plain intent hidden behind legal phrasing. "Jake," Ethan said quietly, tapping the clause. His brother leaned in confusion, crossing his face as he read it. "What does that even mean?" Ethan looked directly at Hale. "It means if we sign every paper in that back room, every photograph, every record goes to him, not us." Hale raised his hand slightly in a gesture of reassurance. "It's standard, gentlemen. When we purchase historic properties, we assume responsibility for anything inside. It ensures nothing interferes with development. Jake hesitated, torn between suspicion and the pull of financial relief. "But the price?" he began. Ethan cut him off gently but firmly. "A high price is never without reason." Hale's smile thinned his charm, still intact, but edged now with impatience. "You're smart to be cautious," he said, directing his words toward Ethan. "But think of what this money means. Repairs debts, futures secured. The past doesn't pay bills. It only weighs you down." Ethan closed the folder calmly. "We'll need time to consider." Hale studied him for a long moment, the silence pressing, then finally nodded. "Of course. But opportunities don't last forever. I'll be in touch." He gathered the papers smoothly, tucking them back into the leather case, then left with a nod to Jake and a final, measured glance at Ethan. The black sedan's engine purred softly as it rolled away down Main Street, leaving behind the faint trace of expensive cologne and unresolved questions. Jake exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Ethan, do you realize what that could do for us? We could finally breathe. No more worrying about the roof caving in or scraping for rent." Ethan leaned against the counter, his expression unreadable. "He doesn't want the building. He wants what's inside it." Jake shook his head. "We don't even know what's inside it. A bunch of old papers. Some photos. Maybe a secret passage. None of that pays for groceries." Ethan placed a steady hand on the box that now contained their grandfather's notebook. "These aren't just papers. They're proof. They're the reason he offered more than it's worth, and the reason he buried that condition in the contract." Ranger shifted closer, his watchful eyes fixed on the door as if expecting Hale to return. Ethan recognized that instinct, the dog's unspoken warning that danger rarely announces itself once. Jake sat heavily on the stool, the pull of money and the weight of history wrestling inside him. "So, what do we do?" "Walk away from the only chance we've got." Ethan's response came quiet but firm. "We do what Granddad did. We hold the line until we understand what we're protecting." Outside, the clouds broke just enough to let a shaft of light cut across the faded Carter's sign, as though even the weather was reminding them of the choice before them. The day after Richard Hale's visit brought with it a cold sunlight that turned the cracked windows of Carter's General into mirrors of doubt. Ethan had barely slept his thoughts, circling back to the hidden clause in the contract, the photographs of strangers their grandfather had sheltered, and the question of what Hale truly sought beneath the facade of real estate development. Jake, restless and visibly worn, had spent half the night pacing their shared apartment, muttering about debts and opportunities slipping through their fingers. That morning, as they pushed open the creaking door of the store, Mrs. Henderson appeared, her presence as steady and familiar as the smell of ink-stamped receipts. She had been the town's banker for longer than either Carter brother could remember her word, carrying the kind of authority born not of power, but of years watching families rise and fall under the weight of bills. She greeted them kindly, but with seriousness in her eyes. "Ethan Jake," she said, stepping inside with her ledger tucked under her arm. "I've been looking over the numbers. You boys need to understand what you're facing." Jake perked up as though expecting an ally, but Mrs. Henderson's voice carried no comfort. "That building you've inherited may have history, but it also has rot. The roof is failing. The foundation shows cracks. To repair it properly, you'd be looking at $30,000, maybe $40,000 money you don't have, and money the bank can't extend without collateral." Jake's shoulders slumped, his hope draining with each figure she listed. Ethan stood straighter, listening without argument but weighing her words against the papers hidden in the metal box. Mrs. Henderson placed a folded paper on the counter, her handwriting neat. "There's an offer on the table, I hear." "A good offer. I would advise you to consider it. Selling now is the sensible thing. Otherwise, you risk sinking under repairs you can't afford." Jake's eyes flicked to Ethan, silently pleading. Ethan thanked Mrs. Henderson with measured politeness. "We appreciate your honesty," he said. She sighed softly, her gaze lingering on them with the kind of pity that comes from knowing how heavy legacies can become. "Don't let sentiment bury you," she whispered before leaving. The door closed behind her, leaving the brothers in silence. Jake broke it first. "She's right, Ethan. We're not equipped for this. You're trained for battlefields, not leaking roofs. I can barely keep up with rent. This is our chance to walk away with dignity." Ethan did not answer immediately. He placed a hand on the notebook, feeling the weight of inked pages that recorded sacrifices their grandfather had made without applause, without reward, only for the sake of decency. "Dignity isn't measured in money," he finally said. "It's measured in what you choose to protect." Jake exhaled hard frustration lining his face, but he didn't argue further. That night, after locking the store and returning home, Ethan found himself replaying Mrs. Henderson's words in his mind. Practicality weighed heavy against loyalty to a past that only they now seemed to value. As the town lights dimmed and Mill Creek grew quiet under a blanket of stillness, Ranger shifted restlessly near the door. The German shepherd's ears twitched his nose, lifting toward a scent carried on the draft. Ethan trusted that posture immediately. He rose, slipping on his jacket, and watched Ranger pad to the window, growling low in his throat. Ethan followed, scanning the darkened street outside. At first nothing moved, but then he caught the faint glimmer of a flashlight flicking inside Carter's General, its beam cutting across the boarded windows. "Jake," Ethan said sharply. His brother jolted awake, eyes wide. "What is it?" Ethan motioned him to silence. "Someone's inside the store." They moved quietly down the stairs, Ethan keeping his voice steady as he instructed Jake to stay behind while he approached with Ranger. The night air felt brittle as they crossed the street, Ranger low at his side. Ethan eased the back door, which hung slightly ajar, a lock broken without noise. He slipped inside, the dog preceding him, muscles taut. The beam of a flashlight swept across the floor near the utility room, not the cash register or shelves, but the very spot where the hollow boards had concealed the stone stairwell. Ethan froze in the shadows, his mind calculating the intruder's intent. Whoever was inside knew where to look. Ranger growled, sharp and immediate, the sound filling the space. The intruder's light jerked upward and hurried footsteps scrambled toward the back exit. Ethan moved forward but did not chase, recognizing the risk of ambush outside. Instead, he crouched near the spot where the light had been fixed, confirming that nothing had been disturbed beyond scratches on the wood, fresh and obvious. He called Ranger back, the dog returning with obedience, but eyes still trained on the door as if expecting the figure to return. Jake rushed in moments later, pale and anxious. Were they trying to steal money? Ethan shook his head. No. They went straight for the stairwell. They weren't looking for cash. They were looking for what we found. Jake's face tightened with realization. "Hale," he whispered. Ethan did not answer, but his silence carried agreement. He checked the locks again, reinforcing them as best he could with temporary boards, knowing well enough that determined men would not be deterred by weak wood. Ranger stayed alert the rest of the night, his body pressed against the door, a living barrier between the brothers and whatever shadows had chosen to circle their inheritance. The break-in at Carter's General changed the air around the store. What had been only suspicion now became certainty. Someone else knew about the hidden stairwell, the box of papers, and the past Samuel Carter had tried to guard. Ethan returned the following morning with Jake and Ranger, both brothers quiet, with unspoken questions. Dust still hung where the boards had been scratched, but the room carried no new disturbance. Ethan decided it was time to search deeper, not just for objects, but for the story their grandfather had left in fragments. He opened the filing cabinet Ranger had pawed at earlier, sliding out drawers stiff with rust. Most folders contained yellowed invoices and supply receipts, harmless on their surface, but tucked in the very back, he discovered a bundle of envelopes bound with twine and sealed with wax. Ethan placed them carefully on the counter, cutting the string with his knife. Inside lay letters written in different hands but sharing a common thread. They were addressed to Samuel Carter, speaking in restrained but urgent tones. One, from 1943, bore the letterhead of Mill Creek's courthouse and was signed by Judge Thompson, whose name Ethan recognized from town history. The judge wrote of arrangements secured for the safe lodging of 2 individuals until passage north can be confirmed. Another letter, dated 1951, came from Reverend Miller of the First Baptist Church, thanking Samuel for providing shelter while the congregation prepared resources for families in need. Ethan read these aloud in measured tones, while Jake listened with growing astonishment. So it wasn't just Granddad, Jake whispered. He wasn't acting alone. There was an entire circle helping him. Ethan nodded, laying out each letter in sequence, creating a map of cooperation that stretched across town. It became clear that Carter's General had been one node in a hidden network, each member offering quiet aid when laws or prejudice refused to. Then came the envelope that made Ethan pause. Its letterhead carried the seal of a shipping company he remembered from old photographs, and its closing signature bore the name William Hale. Jake's breath caught as he leaned closer. "That's Richard's father," he said. Ethan read the letter twice, his jaw tightening. William Hale had once written in strong, clear penmanship about supporting Samuel's efforts, pledging discreet financial assistance to keep the store stocked with food and clothing for those passing through. "Our family owes it to conscience," the letter read, "to offer what help we can quietly for as long as we are able." Ethan laid the letter down slowly, his thoughts weighing heavy. So Hale's father was part of it. He believed in this. Jake shook his head in disbelief. Then why would Richard be trying to bury it now? Why would he want to erase what his father stood for? Ethan did not answer immediately. He looked at the neat rows of correspondence, seeing a story of alliances forged in quiet courage, and then at some point abandoned. Ranger shifted near the counter, his ears pricking at the tension in the room, sensing the gravity of the discovery. Ethan returned to the cabinet and searched deeper, pulling out another folder of handwritten notes. These listed supplies purchased in bulk but disguised under vague terms: flour, coal, lumber. Cross-referenced with the letters, Ethan realized these were coded inventories, resources passed along to families hidden during times of upheaval. Every page reinforced the truth Samuel Carter had dedicated his life not just to running a store, but to shielding lives caught in the storms of history. Jake sat on the stool, his hands folded tightly, his face torn between admiration and confusion. He lived a whole other life right under our noses. He carried it alone and nobody ever told us. Ethan closed the folder gently, his Marine discipline shaping his response. He didn't tell us because he was protecting more than himself. He was protecting the people who trusted him. Secrets like these aren't meant for applause. They're meant to endure. Jake tapped the letter from William Hale, his eyes unsettled. But this changes everything. If Richard's family was once involved, then his push to buy us out isn't just business. It's personal. He wants to erase what his father helped build. Ethan nodded grimly, his gaze fixed on the name signed in steady ink. It was no longer only a matter of money or repairs. It was a matter of memory, of truth, and of a man's betrayal of his own lineage. Ranger moved toward the back door, sniffing the frame as though reminding them that secrecy was fragile, that eyes might already be watching. Ethan gathered the letters into a neat pile, tucking them back into the box. "This isn't just about us anymore," he said firmly. "It's about a story this town has forgotten, maybe even chosen to forget. If Hale succeeds, that story disappears." Jake swallowed hard, his earlier eagerness for Hale's offer dimming in the light of what they had uncovered. He looked around the store, no longer seeing just a failing building, but a vault of history. "So, what do we do?" he asked. Ethan closed the box, his expression calm but resolute. "We keep looking. Granddad left more than letters. He left a trail, and until we've followed it, we don't hand over a single nail of this place." The store had grown colder as evening drew near its dim corners, thick with secrets the brothers were only beginning to uncover. The box of letters lay on the counter, and Ranger paced the floor with a low, restless sound in his throat as if urging them onward. Ethan, his hands steady as always, studied the wall near the back corner where the stonework met the old wood paneling. The surface looked even at first glance, but years of field training had sharpened his eye to notice the faintest inconsistencies. He tapped the wall gently with the handle of his knife, listening for the change in resonance. The sound shifted near a vertical seam, duller, more hollow. Jake crouched beside him, his excitement tempered by a nervous edge. "That's not original construction," he whispered. Ethan nodded, then pressed firmly against the seam. The panel gave way slightly, revealing a narrow gap. Together they worked carefully to loosen the panel until it slid free, revealing a cavity behind. Inside stood 2 iron safes, their surfaces dulled by time, and several wooden crates stacked neatly around them. Dust rose in a faint cloud as the brothers stared in disbelief. Ranger barked once sharply, his tail stiff with alertness, as though he too understood the gravity of what had been revealed. Ethan tested the first crate, prying it open with deliberate force. The lid creaked, then gave way, and inside the lantern light fell upon cloth bags tied with twine. Ethan lifted one and felt the unmistakable weight. He untied it slowly and let the contents spill across his palm. Gold coins, some stamped with American eagles, others foreign, each glinting with the dull luster of age. Jake exhaled a shaky breath, his eyes wide. This is treasure." Ethan didn't answer. He set the coins back with quiet precision and moved to another crate. This one held velvet pouches and small boxes, each containing jewelry rings with intricate settings, necklaces of pearls, brooches that looked handcrafted generations ago. Among them were silver candlesticks, engraved watches, and heirlooms that spoke of long journeys and desperate sacrifices. Every crate opened revealed more stamps sealed in protective envelopes, rare books wrapped in oilcloth medals tucked inside small wooden cases. It was wealth measured not just in money, but in history. A silent archive of lives interrupted and preserved in metal and stone. Ethan turned to the safes, running his hand across the rusted handle. The first one opened with surprising ease, its lock clearly maintained despite the decades. Inside were bundles of papers, each envelope marked with initials and dates. Ethan pulled one free and opened it. A letter lay inside, written in elegant script. He read softly, "To the man who gave us shelter when we fled the violence. Please accept this necklace passed down from my grandmother so that others may find the same safety we did." Jake leaned in closer, scanning the words with reverence. "They weren't paying him," he said. "They were contributing. They were giving him the means to keep going." Ethan nodded, moving through more envelopes. Each one carried the same tone: gratitude, trust, and a determination that their hardship should aid others. Some letters included photographs, a family of 4 in worn coats, smiling faintly for the camera, a young man standing beside a modest house with a note scrawled on the back, "Because of you, we reached safety." Ethan felt a heaviness in his chest as he read them, a mixture of pride and sorrow. These were not transactions. These were testaments. He looked at Jake, who sat transfixed, holding a gold watch engraved with initials and the date 1947. "They didn't give him this to enrich him," Ethan said quietly. "They gave it so the work could continue. Every piece here is a fragment of trust." Jake nodded, his voice catching. "And it means if we sell this place, we're not just selling a building. We're betraying all of them." Ranger circled the crates, sniffing carefully as though cataloging each scent, his sharp intelligence reminding Ethan of the unspoken bond between them. The dog stopped suddenly at one crate in the corner and pawed at it. Ethan opened it and found not treasure but documents bound in leather. They were ledgers, carefully itemized lists of contributions matched with names and notes about their journeys. Ethan leafed through them and saw a pattern, 1938, a professor fleeing Europe left behind rare books. 1956, a Hungarian family gave jewels for passage. 1965, a civil rights worker offered savings bonds for shelter. Each entry connected lives across decades woven together in Samuel Carter's hidden archive. Jake rubbed his forehead, overwhelmed. It's too much to process. All of this was right under our feet while we were scraping together change for rent. Ethan closed the ledger and looked at the gold coins laid out before them. It wasn't meant for us, he said firmly. It was meant for the people who came after, for anyone who needed what they needed. Granddad wasn't just running a store. He was guarding a legacy. The air felt thick with responsibility, pressing down harder than the weight of the treasure itself. Jake finally met Ethan's gaze, his earlier doubts replaced by a reluctant recognition. So what now? Do we keep it hidden? Do we use it? What would he have wanted? Ethan stared at the letters spread across the counter, the voices of strangers who had found hope in Samuel's courage. His voice was quiet but resolute. We'll know what to do when the time comes. For now, we protect it. Like he did. The treasure behind the false wall weighed on both brothers' minds for days, and though they carried on with cautious resolve, neither Ethan nor Jake could shake the sense that someone else already knew what lay beneath Carter's general. The letters and heirlooms had tied them to generations of sacrifice, and the gold and valuables had turned the store into something more than a building. It was now a target. On a gray morning, the first sign of direct pressure arrived. Ethan unlocked the front door to let Ranger inside and saw a single envelope pushed beneath the frame. Its surface bore no return address. No stamp, just their names scrawled in uneven block letters. He opened it with measured hands while Jake hovered by his shoulder. Inside, one short line carried a menace far colder than any weapon. Some secrets are worth more than buildings. Smart men take the money and leave. Ethan read it twice, his Marine discipline keeping his face calm even as unease settled in his stomach. Jake's voice cracked. They know. They're watching. Ethan folded the letter neatly and tucked it into his pocket, his tone firm. That means we stay sharp. We watch back. Ranger sniffed the envelope, growling low, as if confirming the unseen presence of a stranger. They spent that day tightening locks and checking the building's edges, but Ethan knew intimidation rarely stopped at one gesture. He had seen enough in foreign deployments to recognize the opening stage of pressure. That night they returned to their small apartment above town, carrying with them a handful of documents rather than risk leaving everything at the store. Ethan made sure Ranger slept near the door, his instincts as valuable as any alarm system. Sometime past midnight, the sound of a hinge creaking broke the silence. Ethan woke instantly, his training turning sleep into alertness. Ranger had already risen, his hackles raised a deep growl rumbling from his chest. Ethan signaled Jake to stay still and stepped softly across the darkened floor. A faint shadow moved near the kitchen, rifling through drawers. Before Ethan could advance, Ranger launched forward with sudden speed, his bark echoing off the walls like a thunderclap. The intruder froze, then stumbled backward as Ranger bared his teeth, the growl sharp and fierce. Ethan caught the brief shape of a man in a dark jacket, his features obscured by a cap pulled low. The man cursed under his breath and bolted for the fire escape, Ranger lunging to the edge of the window frame with teeth snapping just short of the fleeing figure. By the time Ethan reached the window, the intruder had vanished into the night footsteps fading down the alley below. Jake stood pale, clutching the documents he had gathered instinctively, his hands shaking. He was searching the papers, Jake whispered. He didn't take the TV, didn't touch anything else. Ethan closed the window and latched it tight, his face set in grim lines. They don't want money. They want what we found. Ranger remained by the door, chest heaving, ears sharp, his body still quivering with the urge to defend. Ethan knelt to steady the dog, his hand firm on Ranger's shoulders, speaking quietly as if to both calm the animal and reassure himself. "Good boy. You kept us safe." The rest of the night passed without sleep. Ethan sat at the table with the letter and the scattered documents spread before him, his eyes studying every shadow beyond the window. Jake shifted between pacing and silence, his mind struggling to process how quickly their inheritance had turned into a battlefield. At dawn, Ethan spoke at last. "This isn't random. Whoever sent the letter sent that man. And if they've risked breaking in once, they'll do it again." Jake pressed his palms against his temples, frustration and fear mixing. "We can't live like this. They're not just threatening. They're escalating." Ethan's voice carried the steady conviction he had learned to cling to under fire. "Then we escalate too. We protect what matters. We don't back down." Ranger barked once, sharp and decisive as if echoing the decision. Ethan looked at his brother and added, "They want to scare us into running. But fear doesn't decide this story. We do." The words settled over Jake, not fully erasing the worry in his eyes, but planting a seed of reluctant determination. By the time the morning light filled the apartment, the brothers knew that their grandfather's secret was no longer just a hidden legacy. It had become a contested ground, and they had stepped into the center of it. The morning after the break-in, the Carter brothers sat across from each other at the store's old counter, the air heavy with exhaustion. The anonymous letter lay unfolded between them, its sharp message cutting deeper than any blade. Ethan had spent the night sharpening their defenses in his mind, drafting plans as if preparing for an operation overseas. Jake, by contrast, sat with his arms folded tightly across his chest, his face pale with sleeplessness. Ranger lay between them, his ears twitching at every sound from the street. The dog's instinct tuned to the tension that pulsed unspoken between the brothers. Jake finally broke the silence, his voice rough with strain. "We can't keep living like this, Ethan. We're broke, we're targets, and whoever wants what's under this store won't stop. Selling is the only way out." Ethan lifted his gaze from the letter, calm but unwavering. "Selling isn't survival, Jake. It's surrender. Granddad carried this secret for decades because it mattered. If we give it up now, everything he protected dies with it." Jake pushed back from the stool, his frustration boiling over. "You don't understand what it's like for me. You had the Marines structure, a paycheck, a mission. I've had nothing but patchwork jobs and overdue rent. I'm tired, Ethan. I'm tired of scraping by while pretending honor fills the fridge." Ethan stood his posture instinctively straight, his tone measured but firm. "I do understand, but honor is the only thing that outlasts hunger. If we sell to Hale, we don't just lose money or history, we lose ourselves. We let someone erase every family that trusted Granddad." Jake's hands trembled as he gestured at the scattered letters. "Those people are gone, Ethan. Their lives were saved already. Why should we sacrifice ours for ghosts?" The words stung, though Ethan did not flinch. He had seen young Marines break under pressure, clinging to reasons that felt real in the moment, but would never stand the test of time. He spoke quietly, his voice carrying weight. "Because ghosts are what remind us we're alive. Their stories are the compass. If we sell, we betray them, and we betray ourselves." The room fell into silence, broken only by Ranger's low whine. Jake looked away, his jaw tight. He grabbed his jacket from the chair and pulled it on with sharp, angry movements. "I can't do this anymore. I can't fight your battles or Granddad's. I need a life, Ethan. A real one." Ethan's heart tightened, but his face remained steady. "If you walk away, you're not walking away from me. You're walking away from him, from everything he stood for." Jake's eyes flickered with guilt, but he said nothing. He slung his backpack over his shoulder and strode toward the door. Ranger barked sharply as if to stop him, but Jake didn't turn back. The door closed with a final thud, leaving Ethan and Ranger alone in the dim store. Ethan stood in the silence, his hand resting on the counter, his chest heavy with both grief and resolve. Ranger padded to his side, pressing against his leg, the dog's loyalty grounding him in the emptiness. Ethan knelt, resting his hand firmly on the dog's shoulders. "Looks like it's just us now," he murmured, his voice carrying both sadness and steel. He rose and walked to the back room, securing the panel that concealed the treasure. Alone, he moved through the space with new clarity. There would be no half measures now, no wavering between choices. He would defend Samuel Carter's legacy with Ranger as his only companion, until the truth either stood tall or was buried forever. Weeks passed, with only Ethan and Ranger tending the store, the days long and quiet, the nights marked by vigilance rather than rest. Ethan boarded windows, reinforced locks, and spent hours combing through Samuel Carter's ledgers by lantern light, piecing together a map of hidden histories that spanned far beyond Mill Creek. Ranger rarely left his side, his sharp ears always turning toward the faintest creak of floorboards or distant car engines. Though Ethan moved with soldierly discipline, the absence of Jake gnawed at him, leaving silence heavier than any threat. One cold evening, as dusk spread over Main Street, a familiar knock sounded at the door, hesitant but deliberate. Ethan opened it cautiously, and there stood Jake, thinner than before, his eyes shadowed with guilt, but burning with urgency. Ranger growled low before wagging his tail in recognition, torn between warning and welcome. Jake stepped inside, clutching a folder thick with papers. "I was wrong," he said without hesitation. "I thought leaving would free me, but it only led me deeper into this mess." I started digging Ethan. Hale isn't just after Carter's general. He's part of something much bigger. He spread the documents across the counter where once they had laid Samuel's letters. Newspaper clippings, photocopied deeds, and investigative notes painted a damning picture. These developers, Jake explained, they've been buying properties across 3 states, all with ties to underground networks like Granddad's. Churches, meeting halls, stores like ours. They call it revitalization, but what they're really doing is erasing history. They're scrubbing away places that sheltered people that told the truth of what communities once stood for. Ethan scanned the evidence, his jaw tightening, and Hale Jake's voice hardened. He's one of the lead players. His father supported Granddad, but Richard Hale is burying the legacy his own family once honored. He's not just greedy, Ethan. He's complicit in rewriting history for profit. Ethan looked at Jake for a long moment, searching his brother's face. Jake's eyes carried no trace of the boy who wanted to escape. They carried resolve. I couldn't ignore it once I saw it, Jake admitted. I realized if I walked away, I'd be doing exactly what they want, selling silence, letting them win. Ranger barked once, sharp and affirming, as though echoing the decision already taking root. Ethan placed his hand firmly on the folder, then looked at his brother. "We stand together then. Not for money, not for survival, for Granddad, for everyone who trusted him, for truth." The weight of the words filled the room, binding them to a shared mission greater than both. Jake nodded relief, softening the tension in his shoulders, and for the first time in weeks, the 2 brothers stood side by side again. Ethan spoke with quiet resolve. "We'll protect this place. But more than that, we'll protect the story. If Hale wants to erase it, we'll make it known. We won't hide in shadows like they do." They spent the following days preparing. Jake brought his research tracing connections between Hale Development and shell companies that had swallowed landmarks under the guise of progress. Ethan cataloged every document, photograph, and artifact from the hidden safes, building a record that could withstand scrutiny. Ranger remained vigilant, his presence grounding them both, his intelligence catching every subtle movement outside. When word spread that Hale had scheduled a town meeting to propose his new development project, the brothers knew the time had come. On the night of the meeting, the old town hall filled with curious faces, many tired of decay and eager for promises of renewal. Richard Hale stood at the front, polished and confident, painting a picture of bright storefronts and modern convenience. But when he invited questions, Ethan stepped forward with Jake at his side and Ranger at his heel. In his calm, steady voice, Ethan laid out the truth. He spoke not of numbers or business deals, but of Samuel Carter's letters, of Judge Thompson, Reverend Miller, William Hale, and the families who had once found safety under Carter's roof. Jake added the evidence of Hale's broader network, proof that this was not restoration, but erasure. He held up the letters of gratitude, the photographs of children whose lives had been spared, the heirlooms left behind as acts of faith. "These places aren't relics to be torn down," Jake said, his voice clear. "They are the backbone of our history. To sell them is to betray those who came before us." Murmurs rose through the crowd, doubt shifting to indignation and then to quiet support. Hale tried to dismiss the evidence as rumor, but Ethan laid the folder of documents on the podium for all to see. "This isn't rumor," he said. "It's the truth. Our grandfather carried the truth Hale wants to bury. We won't let that happen." The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation settling like a stone in every heart. Hale's smile faltered, his polished mask cracking under the pressure of exposed truth. The meeting ended without applause for his promises, only quiet suspicion that spread like fire. Back at the store that night, the brothers sat with Ranger between them, the flickering lantern casting steady light on Samuel Carter's legacy. Jake leaned back, his voice softer than it had been in years. "We almost lost it, Ethan. I almost walked away from it all." Ethan placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "You came back. That's what matters. We carry it together now." Ranger rested his head on Ethan's knee, his steady gaze reflecting the loyalty that had never wavered. In the quiet, the Carter brothers understood that they had chosen not the easier road, but the right one. The store was no longer just theirs. It belonged to every life it had touched, every family it had saved, every voice it still carried. And with that understanding came peace. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Tell me in the comments what moment surprised you the most and where in the world are you watching from.